History tells us monsters hide in the dark, waiting to tear us apart. But what if the real monsters are the men we trust, and the creature in the shadows is the only one who sees your broken pieces and calls them a masterpiece? This is Harper's true story. If you had pulled the LAPD incident report for November the 12th, 2022, you would find a heavily redacted file filed by Detective Thomas O'Connor. The official story was a tragic domestic accident, a gas leak, a spark, and a devastating house fire in a quiet suburb of Pasadena. The report stated that Harper Davis's boyfriend, Caleb, had tried to drag her from the flames, but was beaten back by the heat. That was a lie. Caleb hadn't tried to save her. He was the one who locked the deadbolt from the outside. Harper survived, but she paid the price. After 6 months in the burn unit at Cedars-Sinai Medical Center, she was left with extensive jagged scars mapping the entire left side of her body, from her collarbone, creeping up the side of her neck, and stopping just below her jawline, down to her ribs. The skin was puckered, an angry lattice of raised tissue that she painstakingly covered every single day. She wore thick, high-collared turtlenecks, even in the sweltering California July heat. She wore heavy, theatrical foundation. She shrank into herself, convinced that her reflection was a grotesque tragedy that the world needed to be shielded from. Before the fire, Harper had been a prominent historical archivist, working closely with the Huntington Library. After the fire, she became a ghost, only taking private remote contracts where she didn't have to look her clients in the eye. That was how she ended up on the radar of Nathaniel Reed. Nathaniel was a phantom in the Los Angeles real estate and philanthropic scene. He owned a sprawling, Gothic revival estate, hidden deep in the hills of Bel Air, purchased through a labyrinth of LLCs. He was notoriously reclusive, rumored to be afflicted with a rare photosensitivity disorder. When his legal team, a formidable Century City firm, reached out to Harper with a wildly lucrative contract to archive and restore a private collection of 17th-century European manuscripts, she hesitated. The catch was unusual. She could only work at the estate, and her working hours were strictly between 8 p.m. and 4 a.m. Desperate to pay off her mounting medical debt from the skin graft surgeries, Harper accepted. On her first night, she drove her beat-up sedan through the massive wrought-iron gates of the Reed estate. The house was an architectural anomaly, silent and dimly lit by amber sconces. She was shown to the library by an elderly, tight-lipped housekeeper named Mrs. Gable. The room was breathtaking, smelling of old paper, leather, and cedar. Harper immediately set to work, pulling her high collar up to her chin, making sure her hair fell perfectly over the left side of her face. She was 2 hours into translating a faded French ledger when the temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. "You treat the bindings with a remarkable gentleness, Miss Davis." Harper gasped and spun around. She hadn't heard the heavy oak doors open. She hadn't heard footsteps. Standing in the periphery of the lamplight was Nathaniel Reed. He was impossibly tall, dressed in a sharp, tailored dark suit that looked both modern and timeless. His face was striking, sharp cheekbones, a strong jaw, and eyes that were an arresting, icy shade of pale blue. But it wasn't his undeniable beauty that caught Harper off guard. It was the sheer, suffocating gravity of his presence. The air around him felt charged, electric, like the atmosphere seconds before a lightning strike. "Mr. Reed," she stammered, instinctively reaching up to pull her collar higher, a nervous tick she couldn't break. "I apologize. I didn't hear you come in." "I have a habit of walking softly," he said, stepping fully into the light. His gaze locked onto hers. Most people, when they looked at Harper, did a frantic eye dance. They would look at her eyes, dart to the edge of the scar tissue, barely visible under her makeup, panic, and look away. Nathaniel didn't do that. His icy blue eyes held hers with a predatory, yet fiercely gentle stillness. He stepped closer, moving with a fluid grace that made Harper's breath catch in her throat. "The texts you are handling," Nathaniel murmured, his voice a rich, dark velvet that seemed to resonate in her chest, "belonged to a family that was hunted down in the winter of 1692. They are fragile, just like the history they hold." "They're heavily water-damaged," Harper said, trying to keep her voice professional, though her hands were trembling slightly. "But the ink is iron gall. It's preserved well. I can restore the legibility." Nathaniel stopped just inches from her. Up close, his skin was flawless, pale as moonlight and entirely devoid of warmth. "You hide yourself, Harper," he said suddenly, bypassing professional boundaries with a startling intimacy. Harper stiffened, stepping back, her heart hammering against her ribs. "I don't know what you mean." "The heavy wool in summer, the way you angle your chair away from the door, the meticulous foundation that is currently suffocating your pores," he listed, his eyes tracking the subtle lines of her face. "You are concealing a battle you survived." "Why?" Panic flared hot in her chest. "Mr. Reed, I am here to do a job. My personal life, my appearance, is not part of this contract. If my presence makes you uncomfortable—" "Uncomfortable?" Nathaniel interrupted, a dark, low chuckle escaping his lips. He tilted his head, his gaze intensely focused on the left side of her neck, where the collar was beginning to chafe the sensitive, scarred skin. "Harper, I have walked this earth for longer than you can comprehend, and I have seen cities burn and empires collapse. I have seen the very worst of what this world has to offer. Nothing about you makes me uncomfortable. In fact, I find it to be quite the opposite." He didn't touch her. He didn't reach for her. But the way he looked at her felt like a physical touch, bypassing the ruined flesh and seeing straight into the marrow of her bones. Harper grabbed her bag, her fight-or-flight response kicking into overdrive. "I think I should leave for the night," she whispered, her voice cracking. Nathaniel stepped aside instantly, giving her a clear path to the door. "You may leave, Harper, but please come back tomorrow. The texts still need you, and I assure you, you are perfectly safe in my home." As she fled to her car, her hands shaking on the steering wheel, Harper couldn't shake the terrifying, exhilarating feeling that for the first time in 2 years, someone had truly seen her, and they hadn't looked away. For the next 3 weeks, Harper returned to the Bel Air estate every night. A strange, magnetic routine developed between her and the enigmatic billionaire. Nathaniel would appear precisely at midnight. He never ate, he rarely sat, and he never spoke of his business outside the walls of the estate. Instead, he would stand by the massive arched windows, looking out over the glittering, distant lights of Los Angeles, and talk to her. He knew impossible details about history. When Harper struggled to translate a diary entry from 18th century Vienna, Nathaniel absent-mindedly corrected her, citing the regional dialect slang of the era as if he had walked those streets himself. The twists began on a rainy Tuesday in early August. Harper was cross-referencing a set of financial ledgers from a London shipping company dated 1888. A loose piece of paper fluttered out from between the bindings and landed on the Persian rug. Harper picked it up. It was a sepia-toned tin-type photograph, remarkably preserved. It showed a group of men in Victorian formal wear, standing outside a brick townhouse. Harper stared at the man in the center. Her blood ran cold. It was Nathaniel, not someone who looked like him. Him. The exact same sharp jaw, the exact same piercing eyes, the exact same imposing height. He was wearing a dark overcoat, and holding a silver-tipped cane. On the back of the photograph, written in a flourishing, elegant script, was N. Reed, London, 1888. She dropped the photo as if it had burned her. She spun around to look at the ledger on the desk. She flipped to the signatures at the bottom of the shipping manifests. She pulled a sticky note from her own bag, a note Nathaniel had written for her the week prior with a list of books to prioritize. She laid the sticky note next to the 1888 signature. The handwriting was identical, down to the sharp, aggressive loop of the R. "You were not supposed to see that," a voice echoed from the shadows. Harper gasped, stumbling backward and knocking a stack of books to the floor. Nathaniel stepped into the dim light of the library. His face was an unreadable mask, but his eyes were entirely black. The icy blue was gone, replaced by a deep, endless void that seemed to swallow the light around it. "What are you?" Harper breathed, her back hitting the edge of the mahogany desk. Her mind raced to impossible conclusions, logic breaking down in the face of the impossible evidence in front of her. "I think you already know, Harper," Nathaniel said, his voice dropping an octave, taking on a terrifying, preternatural resonance. He took a slow step forward. "I have gone by many names, but I am what the myths warn you about in the dark. I am the predator that stalks the night. I have lived for over 400 years. Harper grabbed the heavy brass letter opener off the desk, holding it out with a trembling hand. "Stay back." Nathaniel stopped. The blackness in his eyes slowly receded, bleeding back into that familiar, piercing blue. A look of profound sorrow crossed his face. "Do you truly believe I would hurt you, after all these weeks?" "My boyfriend said he would never hurt me," Harper screamed, the trauma of her past violently colliding with the terror of the present. "People lie! Monsters lie!" The room fell dead silent. The mention of her past shifted something in the air. "Caleb," Nathaniel said quietly. The way he spoke, the name was laced with venom. Harper froze. "How do you know his name?" "I never told you his name." Nathaniel closed his eyes for a brief moment, letting out a heavy, tired sigh. When he opened them, the raw intensity in his gaze pinned her in place. "Because, Harper, your tragedy was not a domestic accident. Caleb was not just an abusive man. He was a low-level operative for the St. Jude Syndicate." Harper's arm dropped slightly. "The what?" "A deeply funded underground network of modern-day hunters," Nathaniel explained, taking a slow, measured step closer. "They hunt my kind. 2 years ago, they tracked one of my subordinates to Pasadena. Caleb was tasked with setting a trap. He turned your home into a weapon. He ignited the gas line to kill a vampire he believed was coming to your door. You were just collateral damage. A pawn he was willing to sacrifice to complete his mission." The brass letter opener clattered to the floor. Harper felt all the air leave her lungs. The fire. The locked door. Caleb's sudden disappearance after the police report was filed. It all slammed into place with sickening clarity. No, that's impossible." "I am the king of my bloodline," Nathaniel continued, his voice softening as he closed the remaining distance between them. "When I learned what had happened in Pasadena, when I learned an innocent woman had been burned and discarded for a war she knew nothing about, I sought you out. I bought the debt from your hospital. I orchestrated this job. I wanted to ensure you were protected." Tears welled in Harper's eyes, spilling over her lashes. The sheer weight of the betrayal by Caleb, compounded by the horrifying reality of the supernatural world crashing down on her, was too much. The carefully constructed walls she had built around her trauma shattered. She began to sob, a deep, agonizing sound. In her distress, her hand flew to her neck, pulling at the suffocating high collar of her turtleneck. She yanked it down, popping the buttons, desperate for air. The thick fabric parted, fully exposing the angry, twisted red and purple scars that marred her throat and collarbone. She turned her face away in shame, crying, "Don't look at it. Please, don't look at me." Nathaniel didn't turn away. Instead, he reached out. His large, cool hands gently but firmly grasped her wrists, pulling her hands away from her neck. His touch was cold, but it sent a shockwave of electric heat straight to her core. "Harper, look at me," he commanded, his voice thick with emotion. She squeezed her eyes shut, shaking her head. "It's hideous. I'm a monster." "You have no idea what a monster truly is," Nathaniel whispered fiercely. He stepped directly into her space. He lifted one hand, trailing his cool, elegant fingers lightly over the jagged edge of the burn scar on her jawline. Harper flinched, expecting him to pull back in disgust. He didn't. Slowly, reverently, Nathaniel leaned down. His lips brushed against the ruined skin of her jaw. Harper gasped, her eyes flying open. His lips were cool, soft, and impossibly gentle. He kissed the scar there, then slowly trailed his lips down to her neck, pressing a tender kiss against the most painful, raised tissue on her throat. "Every mark," Nathaniel whispered against her skin, his breath sending shivers down her spine. He kissed her collarbone, right over a deep, puckered burn. "Every scar." He pulled back just enough to look into her tear-filled eyes. His own eyes were blazing with an ancient, fierce devotion. "Beautiful," he breathed. "A testament that you fought the fire, and you won." For the first time since the night her life burned down, Harper didn't feel broken. Standing in the arms of a creature of the night, surrounded by centuries of secrets, she finally felt whole. But outside the iron gates of the Bel Air estate, the syndicate was watching. And Caleb wasn't finished with her yet. In the weeks that followed that night in the library, the heavy, suffocating atmosphere of the Bel Air estate transformed into a sanctuary. For the first time in 2 years, Harper stopped hiding. She traded her heavy, high-collared wool sweaters for soft cotton V-necks and silk blouses that breathed in the lingering California heat. She stopped applying the thick, theatrical foundation. When she caught her reflection in the gilded antique mirrors lining the estate's hallways, she didn't look away. Nathaniel made sure of it. He never stopped looking at her. Their dynamic shifted from employer and archivist to something ancient and deeply profound. They spent their nights translating the 17th century texts side by side. Nathaniel shared stories of his past, not as a monster, but as a witness to human history. In return, Harper shared her fears, her lost dreams, and the agonizing physical therapy she had endured at Cedars Sinai. But the St. Jude Syndicate had not forgotten the Vampire King, nor had they forgotten the loose end they left in Pasadena. The illusion of safety shattered on a moonless Tuesday in late October. Harper was alone in the East Wing archives, carefully cataloguing a series of leather-bound maps, while Nathaniel was attending to a secure conference call with his international assets. At exactly 2:14 a.m., the estate went pitch black. This wasn't a standard Los Angeles rolling blackout. The heavy silence was absolute. The backup generators, custom-built to engage within 3 seconds, remained dead. Harper's instincts, honed by trauma, flared instantly. The air felt wrong. The distinct, sterile smell of ozone and burnt wiring wafted through the ventilation shafts. It was a targeted EMP, an electromagnetic pulse. Before Harper could reach the heavy oak doors of the archive room, she heard the unmistakable sound of tactical boots on the marble floors of the hallway. They moved with military precision. She backed into the shadows between the towering bookshelves, her heart hammering wildly against her ribs. "Check the thermal signatures. FLIR optics on," a harsh, familiar voice commanded from the corridor. "The king runs cold. Look for the human. She's the bait." Harper clamped a hand over her mouth. Her blood turned to ice. It was Caleb. The heavy archive doors burst open, the wood splintering off the hinges. 3 men swept into the room, their weapons raised, moving with practiced, lethal efficiency. They wore unmarked black tactical gear, resembling a rogue division of a private military contractor like Constellis or Garda World. And walking behind them, holding a high-powered flashlight, was the man who had burned her alive. Caleb looked exactly the same. His perfectly styled hair, his sharp jaw, the charismatic smile that had completely fooled her 3 years ago. But now, looking at him without the blinders of love, Harper only saw a predator. "Well, well," Caleb sneered, shining the flashlight directly into the aisle where Harper was hiding, the beam catching her exposed face. "Look what the king dragged in. You've stopped wearing the makeup, Harper. Bold choice. Though I have to admit, the melted wax look still doesn't suit you." Harper didn't cower. The terror that had initially gripped her was rapidly being replaced by a white-hot, consuming rage. She stepped out from behind the shelves, the beam of the flashlight blinding her, but she kept her chin high. "You locked the door," Harper said, her voice eerily steady, echoing in the vast room. Caleb chuckled, stepping closer, motioning for his men to fan out and secure the perimeter. "I did more than that, babe. I poured the accelerant. You were supposed to be asleep, but you woke up too early, ruined the timeline. I had to improvise." He unholstered a sleek, suppressed Glock 19 and pointed it casually at her chest. "But you're going to be useful today. Director Hayes wants the Vampire King's head, and Nathaniel Reed has a fatal flaw. He gets attached to broken things." "If you think you can use me to kill him," Harper said, her hands balling into fists at her sides, "you severely underestimate what he is." "He's a leech," Caleb spat, the charismatic facade dropping to reveal the fanatic underneath. "And right now, he's trapped in the West Wing, with heavily armed men pouring liquid UV into the ventilation system. He's burning, Harper, just like you did." "Are you certain about that, Caleb?" The voice did not come from the doorway. It came from directly above them. Before Caleb could look up, the glass skylight 30 feet above shattered inward. A shower of reinforced glass rained down, glittering like diamonds in the beams of the flashlights. Nathaniel dropped into the center of the room with the force of a meteor. The impact cracked the marble floor. He didn't rise slowly. He moved with a terrifying, inhuman blur of speed. Before the first mercenary could pull his trigger, Nathaniel was in front of him. A sickening snap echoed through the archives as the man was thrown halfway across the room, crashing into a mahogany display case. The remaining 2 mercenaries opened fire. The suppressed weapons spat lead, but they were shooting at shadows. Nathaniel was an ancient apex predator unchained. He moved through the gunfire as if stepping between raindrops. He disarmed the second man, shattering his assault rifle with a single, brutal strike, before incapacitating him with a blow to the chest that stopped his heart just short of lethal force. Caleb scrambled backward, his eyes wide with absolute terror, wildly firing his Glock. 1 bullet grazed Nathaniel's shoulder, tearing through his bespoke suit. Nathaniel didn't even flinch. The wound instantly sealed itself, leaving only a hole in the fabric. In less than 10 seconds, the highly trained strike team was neutralized. Only Caleb remained, his gun empty, clicking uselessly as he pressed his back against the heavy iron radiator. Nathaniel stalked toward him. The Vampire King's eyes were not blue. They were the bottomless, terrifying black void Harper had seen weeks ago. The air in the room grew freezing cold, frost literally creeping across the edges of the shattered skylight glass. "You came into my home." Nathaniel's voice was a dark, vibrating rumble that shook the dust from the shelves. "You threatened my archivist, but your greatest sin, Caleb, was what you did in Pasadena." Nathaniel reached out, grabbing Caleb by the tactical vest and lifting the grown man off his feet with one hand as easily as if he were a rag doll. Caleb choked, his legs kicking frantically in the air. "Please," Caleb gasped, his arrogance completely evaporated. "Please don't kill me." "Kill you?" Nathaniel tilted his head, his black eyes narrowing. "Death is a mercy you have not earned." Nathaniel threw Caleb violently to the floor, right at Harper's feet. Caleb groaned, clutching his ribs, looking up at the woman he had tried to destroy. "Harper," Nathaniel said, the demonic resonance leaving his voice as he looked at her. His eyes returned to their striking icy blue. "He is yours. Do what you will." Harper looked down at Caleb. For 2 years, this man had haunted her nightmares. He had been the architect of her pain, the monster in the dark. But looking at him now, pathetic, broken, and begging on the floor, she realized he was nothing. He wasn't a monster. He was just a cruel, weak man. She touched the scars on her neck, tracing the raised tissue. She didn't feel shame anymore. She felt the undeniable proof of her own survival. "I don't want his blood on my hands," Harper said coldly. "He doesn't deserve to die in the dark like a martyr for his syndicate. Expose him." Nathaniel's lips curved into a proud, dangerous smile. "As you wish." Nathaniel stepped over Caleb and knelt down, grabbing the man's jaw and forcing him to look into his eyes. "You will confess," Nathaniel compelled, his voice dripping with ancient mesmerism. "You will walk into the LAPD Robbery Homicide Division at the Wilshire Station. You will hand Detective Thomas O'Connor the encrypted hard drives detailing the St. Jude Syndicate's illegal operations, their financial backers, and their assassinations. You will confess to the arson in Pasadena, and then you will spend the rest of your miserable human life in a concrete box remembering this exact moment." Caleb's eyes glazed over, his pupils dilating massively as the compulsion locked into his fragile human mind. "I will confess," he whispered monotonously. "I will go to the LAPD." "Leave," Nathaniel commanded. Caleb stood up mechanically, walked out of the ruined archive room, and disappeared into the night. He would do exactly as commanded. The Syndicate's Los Angeles cell would burn by sunrise, dismantled by their own operative. The silence that followed was heavy, but peaceful. The threat was gone. Harper stood shivering slightly in the cool night air, blowing in through the broken skylight. Nathaniel stepped toward her, his expression softening entirely. He reached out, carefully brushing a piece of shattered glass from her hair. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his voice a low, tender murmur. Harper shook her head, looking up into his eyes. "No. Because of you." "No," Nathaniel corrected gently, cupping her scarred cheek with his cool palm. "Because of you. You are the bravest creature I have ever known, Harper Davis." Harper leaned into his touch, closing her eyes. The trauma of the fire would always be a part of her history, written on her skin. But she was no longer a victim hiding in the shadows. She was the archivist of the king, standing fearlessly in the light. Nathaniel leaned down, pressing a soft, lingering kiss to the jagged scar on her jawline. And in the quiet aftermath of the chaos, He whispered the only word that mattered. Beautiful. If Harper's incredible journey from surviving the darkest betrayal to finding power and real love gave you chills, let me know. Hit that like button, share this video with someone who needs a reminder that their scars make them beautifully strong, and subscribe for more real-life dramatic storytelling and hidden secrets you won't hear anywhere else. Drop a comment below. Would you have trusted Nathaniel? See you in the next video.